Hello, everyone. Welcome to our LinkedIn Live today. I hope everyone can see the screen that's being shared just now. So today we'll be discussing the big question of if there's still a long-term career in the energy industry for early career professionals. So no doubt people starting out in energy today are definitely hearing mixed messages. So today we'll try and have a bit of a practical conversation around the uncertainty, as well as how career development is changing and the types of skills and choices that young professionals can make today to help you keep building momentum as the market keeps shifting. So I'll start off by introducing our panelists today. So myself, I'm Sneha. I'm a process engineer at Apollo. I joined as a graduate 3 years ago. I'm on the Apollo graduate program called the Launchpad. Just coming up to the end of it now. And most of my work's kind of around the North Sea oil and gas assets and brownfield modifications, emissions reduction scopes, and things like asset life extension studies. Next on our panel, we've got Ryan Mingus. He's our strategic director and one of the founders of Apollo, where we work across the whole energy landscape from offshore oil and gas to renewables, onshore built environments, and industrial decarbonization. So Ryan spends most of his time helping our clients navigate the energy transition, as well as making sure our own business and people are set up for long-term careers in a changing sector. Then we have Thomas Gourlay. He's our operations director. He started at Apollo as a senior structural engineer and swiftly moved through various managerial positions, including engineering manager, engineering director, and now to his current role as the operations director. Then we have Craig Shepherd, a fellow engineer. He works in Apollo's advisory team. He graduated with a master's in offshore and mechanical engineering and joined Apollo's structural engineering team in 2022. But his interests lie in decarbonization and net zero, which has led him to his new role where he advises clients on how to decarbonize their industry and assist in producing a sustainable and just energy transition. So I think let's just kick the discussion right off. So we'll go into our first question. Are opportunities shrinking or just shifting in energy? So in Aberdeen, the North Sea is obviously a mature basin. There's a lot of uncertainty currently around the future of it, but simultaneously, we're also seeing a widening skills gap in the oil and gas sector in the UK. So what are the actual effects of this on opportunities for young professionals? So I'll go to you, Ryan, first for this question.
Thanks, Nia. Thanks for the invite to this LinkedIn Live. It's the overall sort of subject is one that's close to my heart. It's one of the reasons that we set up Apollo is to create opportunities for people in the energy sector. Around those opportunities and are they shrinking or just shifting? I think my view is that opportunities are shifting, but the shift is not happening fast enough to fully replace what is being lost in the UK oil and gas sector. We absolutely need to undertake an energy transition. I fully support that. But the UK still needs oil and gas in the short term. And if we're going to need it, it makes sense to produce it, to protect the local supply chains. These are the supply chains that will drive the energy transition in the future. And if we don't produce it ourselves, we're just simply importing that. I think everyone understands that. The reason that it matters is not just about energy security, but it's about that capability, as I said, preserving the supply chain. If you look at the work that Paul Lou's done in RGU, their latest analysis shows that the UK offshore energy workforce was about 154,000 people in last year or the year before, with around 115,000 of those in the oil and gas sector and the balance around 40,000 in the renewable sector. So oil and gas is still doing much of the heavy lifting in jobs and supply chains, but policy currently is anti-oil and gas, favouring imports and pointing to necessity to increase energy transition pace, which sounds great, but practically, are we ready yet? So the job story in transition areas such as offshore wind is more complicated than people sometimes suggest. I think the opportunity is real, but jobs outcomes depend heavily on local content. For example, around 25% of capex activities is done in the UK. So you can see from that an awful lot of the work is actually done outside of the UK. And sticking with the offshore wind sector, policies in wind such as transmission charging are making many projects unfeasible or certainly stalling them. So I would say the opportunity is shifting, but the replacement is incomplete somewhat. Current government policies in creating more uncertainty, and that's a little bit of a challenge in and around where we are right now.
Thanks, Ryan. Craig, do you have anything to add on this? I know you work in the advisory field. What's your take? Do you think there's opportunities opening up in green jobs?
Yes, I definitely think so. The wind sector is obviously the big tangible one up here and across the country. For directly, I want to work in wind, so I'm going to go work on a wind turbine, or I'm going to work on the operation and maintenance boat. There are obvious tangible opportunities, but there's also a lot of sort of more intangible, like supply chain opportunities. So, for example, Apollo would consider us a supply chain company. We're not an operator. We don't operate the wind turbines, but we do a lot of work for them. I think it can be tough to try and identify these roles to pick them out. But there's definitely a lot of opportunity. It's just not as really overt and obvious as typing in I would like sustainability job or green energy job, and you get the job title of green energy engineer or something. It's not as black and white as that, but there's definitely a lot of opportunities. There's definitely a lot of people who want to learn about net zero, about the energy transition, about new technologies, and they're willing to employ people and pay for it. So yes, definitely the opportunities are there.
Good. And do you think young professionals are aware of these opportunities, or do you think there's some gap in how these opportunities are being presented and marketed to young professionals?
Yeah, I think I just touched on it there, but I think there's a lot of ignorance around the green energy and what it actually means. It's probably a problem with government policy, and just everything is buzzwords and rage bait and short headlines now. It's really, that's just kind of white noise, and people think, oh well, green energy, wind, oh heat pumps, yeah, I want to get involved in that somehow. But people just know the buzzwords, and they just know the sort of white noise, hot air headlines. I think it's, if you want to really achieve a just transition and get to net zero on target, which I'm very passionate about, a big part of that needs to be educating. It's not about, if you take a hydrogen project from, TRL level 8 to 9, that's great, but it's actually not as important, in my opinion, than educating somebody who knows nothing about green energy and green energy jobs, to showing them a pathway into it, showing a pathway from North Sea oil and gas workers, for example, into reskilling courses, upskilling courses, and then where do they take it from there? I think that is a really key point that is a little bit missing right now on just that kind of really basic fundamental education. But you have to start at the bottom. That's where we've got to start.
Just to add,
absolutely.
Just to add what Craig's saying there, then I think it is a big shift in that, like over the last sort of 20 plus years, it's been quite a clear sort of energy sector in the sense of like an oil and gas energy sector, and with companies at the top of that, big operators, well-known brands globally, here in the UK, and then there's big names of supply chains in that. And with that shift in pattern, and with the sort of a lot of the talk that goes on in the media and the politics just now as well, and as we move into sort of new energies, this is, we're starting things from a very fresh base, and actually a lot of the challenges that we're facing are requiring solutions now. And therefore, like what Craig is saying, those pathways to bring in the next generation to that maybe aren't so obvious because they're not established. There's a lot of smaller businesses establishing themselves to fulfill these new challenges. And as a lot of the bigger companies are pivoting and changing, it's quite uncertain how they bring these new graduate pathways. And so seeing something like, you say, like a big graduate wind pool to apply to, or here's the obvious big company that does wind, here's the one that does hydrogen, here's the one that does grid infrastructure. It's just the pathways are just not there yet. But there's loads of opportunities to get involved. I think there's so many interesting businesses out there looking at new technologies, and energy has never been so diverse in the UK. And, even over the last 5 years of what we've seen of the things that have come and gone as well, there's things that pop up and go away, but these are all great skills that people can take on board. And I think it's key to get in and get involved and see different aspects of it. And the transferable skills comes from taking on one opportunity that leads you to the next. And so don't be blinded by the fact that it might be an oil and gas, and the rhetoric is that we're disappearing, and that it is in a decline. But it's still there's still opportunities to be had there, and there's still lots of things to learn from the oil and gas industry. And it is largely the 154,000 people still employed in the industry just now. It's a big number, and those skills will transfer into the next opportunity. So I think look beyond the big headline companies as well, and look for some of these small, interesting opportunities that are out there to develop something new. A lot of these skills will transfer as the energy sector keeps on transforming itself. It will eventually settle at some point, but there's lots of things going on, and there's probably never been a bigger time for grid infrastructure. We often talk about the generation side, but the transmission and distribution of that is massive in the UK, and a massive problem that needs solved. And hopefully the next generation are able to do it.
Thanks, very insightful from all of you. We'll move on to the next question now. So what do you think good early career development looks like now? So North Sea operators and a lot of supply chain companies are operating a lot leaner now and more efficiently. So how has this changed the way that young professional development and learning is actually approached? So I'll go to you, Thomas, for this question.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And, Kerry, think back to, I graduated in 2010, and it was actually during a financial crash. My background in structural engineering, graduated civil engineering degree. And in 2010, it was a financial crash. To do civil engineering was actually really difficult. It was really difficult to find a job, but often is the case that the oil and gas sector went in the opposite trends, and it was a good year in 2010. So joined in the industry, I joined for Wood at the time, Wood Group, and I think there was 50 graduates, sort of between technical and non-technical, all started the same year as me. And that career pathway that went, they had a very structured graduate development pathway, and looking back on what we did as part of that, I did material testing. I did a one-day how to manage your team course. I did a welding course. I actually did 2 welding courses. To this day, I've never welded. To this day, I've never pulled materials apart and really tested anything. And I think it was probably about 8 years after doing my one-day course that I actually had to manage people. So, I think it's changed. I joined definitely in a boom. Oil, the price of oil was over $100 a barrel, and it's today's world. It's a lot leaner, particularly in oil and gas. It's a lot of a leaner industry, and those big intakes of graduates probably don't exist as much as they do in terms of single intakes, like I talked about earlier, of those larger tier companies taking on big swathes of people. It's the opportunity still exists, and actually, if you look at the numbers again compared to when I was back in 2010, the opportunities now are more. There's more jobs available than there were in 2010. However, there's probably twice the amount of graduates than there were in 2010. And that's, been a big shift in government policy where people are getting pushed or encouraged to go into higher education. But the jobs aren't keeping up with the number of people coming out of university. So I think that's why people are finding that part challenging. But then I go back to, what does it good look like now? I don't think that necessarily having a big fund of training courses where you sat in a meeting room for a week, or you went off site for a day or here or there, doing all these different courses was actually where I learned anything. I think what I've really benefited from is the people sitting next to me, the people that I could just ask questions to and would spend the time with me of like learning on the job, and how do I do this, and well, what does that mean? And I think that was probably more beneficial, just diving into the deep end, getting on the job. And sometimes it feels that, if you don't get a certificate at the end of the day, that you aren't been trained and you aren't been developed. But the crux of it is actually doing some numbers and design, and whatever the aspect of your skills are in, is that people around you are who you'll learn the most from. We often talk about this sort of 20% sort of formal training, 80% on the job training, and I do think that that's a big thing. So it's a shift in the landscape. I think there's still a perception that it's the graduates of today are being underdeveloped, and that could still apply. I'm not saying that it's not the case in everywhere, but I wouldn't look at the fact that the funding being applied to these things isn't being removed is necessarily a bad thing. I think what good looks like today is being offered opportunities to work on live work, being supported by a mentor, by people around you who are willing to put the time in. I think it also, there's a shift as well around how you learn. Even back when I started, it wasn't just a case of learning in the 9-to-5 job. You learned outside the job. The networking is so important, and being encouraged and supported into networking events, going along, into the institutions, particularly going on your charter pathways, but going to these networking events, taking an interest in what it is you do. Reading, working outside of your 9-to-5 job by reading articles, following things on LinkedIn, speaking to people that have similar interests to you can really benefit in you and develop your wider appreciation of skills. So yeah, as I say, I think it's definitely changed from when I started, but I actually think for the better. I think there's more focus on actually learning on the job and learning with people around you rather than sitting in a stuffy meeting room for a week and getting a certificate that you forget what it was even about a few years later.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's quite interesting the point you mentioned about learning on the job and learning from the people around you. I definitely find that to be probably the biggest source of information so far. And that actually leads quite nicely into our third question. So, how are changes in the way we work affecting early career professionals? So specifically, I want to touch on two things here. So just on that learning from the people around you, hybrid versus in-person working. Is remote working changing the way that young professionals develop, and are young professionals still exposed to the same opportunities? I'll open this first bit to the floor.
I think it's an interesting one around the hybrid working, just sort of reflecting on what Craig was saying, and then what Thomas had been saying there, that I fully agree, and I think that everyone that'll resonate with lots of people, that the best way to learn something is have a go at it type sort of approach to things, and you get the support from those around you. I think that there is challenges with the hybrid working that we've now sort of, most companies are in the routine of doing, where you're not spending that as much time face to face with your colleagues, and you can still ask the questions and things remotely, but some things that maybe naturally come out around the coffee machine or whatever, if you're not around that coffee machine in the office with your colleagues, then you're missing various opportunities, whether you realize it or not, perhaps. So it's elements like that does concern me, as well as from a company culture point of view. That's an area that's really a passion of mine, setting a good bedrock and foundation for the business, what you're all about, and the sort of behaviors that you want to try and encourage in the people that work in a business. It's very hard to instill those or to maintain them when people aren't all physically together. It's not impossible, however, but that does then have an impact on people and learning as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Craig, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, I'm coming from an angle where I joined Apollo after COVID, so I've only known hybrid working, same as you, Snea. I think because it's all we've known, I think it works perfectly. We see no issues with it. Like everything, it just requires that balance. So like Ryan's saying, 2-3 days a week, go to the coffee machine and speak to people. But the other 2 days, if you need to take care of personal things or things like that, you have the freedom to do that. And I think that's actually the modern workplace and the way it's going for our industry. Obviously, different jobs, like in technicians or fabricators or whatever, they have to be at their place of work. But I think anybody who is able to work remotely should work remotely, or the hybrid arrangement, just because that's the way the workforce is going. The sort of the competitive workplace, if you like, for the energy industry, it demands efficiency. It demands constantly getting better, getting more efficient as a company. and being able to employ people from further afield, or being able to accommodate people who maybe have childcare arrangements or they have medical requirements that means they can't be in the office 2-3 days a week. Previously, maybe 10 years ago, you just wouldn't have employed that person and you would have lost out on some skills, but now you can accommodate that. So I think it's a definite necessity for the modern workplace, but I think the definite necessity has to be a hybrid, like Ryan's talking about. You have to get in, you have to speak to people, you have to have these off, unintentional conversations with people and think, oh yeah, you're right, actually, maybe I could get involved in that or something like that. But I think definitely it's the way the workplace is going. I think it's definitely not going to go backwards for desk jobs, if you want to call what we do that. I think it's the way forward, and I think it's pretty good.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
absolutely. I think Apollo's quite good in this aspect still. Like everyone does come in and it's quite a busy office and a lively office and people do speak to each other.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I actually don't really like the term hybrid. I feel it implies that you have to work from home as well as working in the office. And I always much prefer to sort of talk about it being flexible, like, because it shouldn't be like a fixed rota of Mondays I'm always at home, Tuesdays I'll come in, but Wednesdays afternoons I'll be at home. And you feel that it becomes almost an instilled way of working. And I would say, like, I do think it's really important for people starting off in their career, much as I was talking about, is learning from others. And whilst the people that are further on in their career might have a more fixed rota of coming in, 3 days a week or whatever the sort of the policies are or the routine works, there's other people that you learn from, not just the people that sit next to you. And if you're constantly coming in the same days and actually you're missing key conversations that are happening on the day that you always work from home, then you can't make up for those things. And I feel the more time you can spend around people, particularly in your early career, you'll learn more from what's going on around you, outside of your disciplines, outside of the bit that you're doing on a project, listening to what else is going on in the project, asking what finance are up to, what are HR doing, what are the non-technical roles contributing to business, and hearing people like strategy directors like Ryan talking about the wider industry and just meeting them for a coffee. There's huge amounts of benefits, and I think once you get further on in your career, being able to knuckle down and stay at home and turn out something is obviously beneficial as well. And the reason I sort of go back to that flexible, because I think no matter what stage of career you're at, being able to either, like Craig touched on, there's skills that you can be. We're missing out skills if you're full-time having to be in an office, and people that doesn't work. So we're actually able to employ people on a more flexible basis. But equally, if you've got an appointment or you've just, you're feeling a bit under the weather, you're fine to keep working and you want to sort of do that, or just different things that could be flexible, not on a rigid hybrid process.
Yeah, I'm just going to push back on that a little bit, because I've heard this quite a lot as a graduate. You need to be in the office to hear things. I get the point. I think it makes a lot of sense, but just my personal experience, I think it's just a really flowery anecdote, when the reality is most people sit with headphones on, or you come into the office and all of your team are at home, or you've got headphones on yourself so you don't hear anything. Having seen graduates come and go from Apollo, you see the good ones and you see the bad ones. I think it's nothing really to do with when you're in the office and overhearing people and things like that. I think that's a really good idea, that in principle it makes sense. You might overhear something and you might think, I'm interested in that. But I think that maybe makes up for about 1% of the good ideas you have as a graduate. I think the 99% of the other good ideas are you intentionally thinking, I want to learn this, or I want to learn that, or I know the person who I need to speak to, I'm going to email them, or I'm going to Teams message them or something. I think that anecdote about you need to be in the office to hear things just doesn't ring true for me personally. And I'm not saying it's wrong, but I'm just saying for me, I don't think that's totally true. I think as a graduate, where you're going to get value is going and intentionally trying to learn things. If you just hang around the office and you'll just hear things and you'll get the chat with folk and you'll just get better, it's not like that. You have to go, you have to try and learn things. You have to seek out the opportunities yourself.
Yeah, I do agree with that point, Craig, definitely. Ryan, were you going to say? something?
Yeah, I was just going to say the same. Yeah, I think it's you've got to stick your hand up, and you've got to look after your own career. The company's got to support that as well. But it's down to reflecting on. I'm proud of the number of graduates that we've taken into the business through the years. I think we've punched above our weight for the scale we are, and I think, you know, it's not about who's done better and who's not so much, but it's those that stick their hand up and get involved, perhaps in the wider business. And you can still do that remote. You can do that in the office, you know, whatnot. But I think some opportunities you might not identify them if you weren't in the office at some point, but everyone is at some point. So I think it's about rolling the sleeves up and taking an interest, not just in what you're doing and looking after your own career, but looking around to you and how you can support other people's careers around you, and having that sort of attitude, I think, is really positive.
Yeah, I do agree with you, Craig. I think it's not a passive absorbing thing. You do have to sort of go after that. It's being there and understanding who's talking about what to then ask to be able to set up that email. And that's where, you know, the more time you spend around these people, you hear that they're talking about something, and yeah, it's not that you're going to suddenly have the knowledge by sitting and just absorbing what they're chatting about. You do have to be proactive and go after it. You're absolutely right.
Yep, absolutely. The second thing I wanted to touch on for this question is AI. So should young professionals view AI as a threat or an opportunity? Craig, I'll come to you for this one.
Yeah. I think simply just AI is another technology advancement, same as the typewriter, same as the computer, same as the car for the horse and cart. It's just a technology advancement. And kind of like any technology advancement, it's actually up to you whether it's a threat or an opportunity. You can be the guy who says, no, I want to keep doing my engineering drawings on paper. And then in 20 years' time, the people who are doing them on CAD on the computer are just producing 10 more than you a day, 20 more than you a day, PDFing them, emailing them, blah, blah, blah. You're still mucking around with heaps of sheets all over the place. So it's just up to you. You don't have to embrace AI if you don't want to, but I said this earlier, the modern workplace demands efficiency. So if you don't embrace it, other people are just going to get more efficient at you. Maybe people who aren't actually as skilled as you, but are just going to start being able to churn out stuff way quicker. And it's not a big rat race. It's not a race of who's the most efficient, but you will just fall behind and behind and behind. I think my advice would be you need to use AI to replace tedious tasks. That is what it is best for right now. Speaking as somebody who's been using it regularly for a couple of years now, it is best used to replace a tedious task. So instead of getting it to write a report for you, which would replace, I don't know, a month task, and you now do it in 8 hours because you then have to muck around with the response and stuff, use it to replace a 10-minute task and change it down to 1 minute or 30 seconds and just stack them up over the day. So I've just got some notes on that here. One trick I would say is only get it to do tasks that you yourself can determine if it's done correctly or not. So a good example is getting AI to write a formula for you in Excel. You know if it's right or wrong immediately because of the output. And then you can go back to AI and say, that output's not right. It's actually giving me this. And it'll go, okay, right, I think it's that. And you can work through it because you know what the output should be. A bad example would be somebody who's uninformed, maybe a student or a non-industry professional, saying something like, compare net zero technologies and rank the best one for the UK. That's just, who knows what it's going to pull from, who knows what sources it's going to use. And the big thing is, it's not just who knows, but it's you don't know. If you don't know or even have a rough idea what the answer should be, don't get AI to do it, because then you open yourself up to what we're now seeing more of. Is because AI has been going for maybe 3-4 years now, and I'm talking about not broad AI, I'm talking about the chat bots, the pilots, whatever you want to call them. We're now starting to see people who are very good at using them and very good at manipulating the outcome, and then people who aren't. And now people are just poking holes in somebody straight away and going, that's AI. You've just taken that straight from AI. And now people are getting found out because they don't really know how to use it properly. They're producing AI slop, is what you call it. And now people can very quickly see that and go, nope, that's AI slop. I'm not dealing with you. So like I said, we're already there where some people didn't embrace it 5 years ago, and now they've fallen behind these people, and now they're trying to catch up already. That's I spoke for a bit of time there, Ryan and Thomas. So do you boys want to go?
But it's interesting. I mean, the point you make is good, and you're looking at it from that sort of in that individual lens, and I kind of can't help myself but always looking at it through the business level lens. But I think it sort of reflects, or it sort of backs up what you're saying as well. For businesses, you need to embrace AI. It can take away these sort of tedious tasks, as you say. It can keep you ahead of the competition by doing certain things better. You have to be real cautious with it as well, though. But I think now in Apollo we've got a digital team that's growing and is a key part of the overall business. I think when we formed Apollo, that wasn't necessarily part of the early business plans. It wasn't really in our thinking so much. So I think these are new roles that we've created, and we're still growing the rest of the business as well. And I think that's taking away these tedious tasks will open up the door to new opportunities and new roles, and getting stuck into things that are frankly maybe more interesting as well. But it's really important for businesses to embrace AI as well, and to make the best of it. But it's complex. It's easy to go down some rabbit holes, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, I think there was some good advice there, Craig, particularly around the sort of replacing the tedious tasks, and it's a good way of looking at it. I also just think back, going back to my own sort of career, and when I first started out, it was, the oil and gas sector, potentially because it was, doing well, and innovation wasn't such a big thing, and particularly in terms of engineering. And coming out of university in 2010, it was amazing how much we still did hand calcs, and everything was pencil and paper, and bringing in things like MathCAD and Excel were sort of, they were happening, but not on any sort of large scale. Now, particularly post COVID, pen and paper around the office is a scarcity. But and you just think, well, that was an evolution only 16 years ago of actually digitizing calculations, and the efficiencies that we got from that, rather than when an input changed, you had to rewrite your whole set of calculus, go through your rubber and make a whole mess, updating all your calculations, scan them all in, and all this sort of stuff. Now it's changing an input in a cell that feeds all the way through, and PDFing these things. So it's an evolution, and AI is just that next one, arguably more powerful, and can do a lot more. But with that comes the risks as well, that people become, we always sort of say that, sort of rubbish in, rubbish out sort of thing with analysis, and analysis tools is most people can use them, but do they actually know what they're doing? And it's that same application to AI. If you don't know what output you're expecting, and you can't really challenge that output, then don't use it for that application. You've got to be able to verify what's coming out of that. So I think it was some good tips there, Craig.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Excel ones, it's so good for Excel and things like that. On the last project, had to use Power BI and sort of learn it on the job. And I can't imagine how long it would have taken me without ChatGPT giving me the guides to how to write the Power BI formulas. So it's definitely got its uses there. Let's move on to the next question. So what can graduates actually do to stay employable across energy? So in this question, this could be advice to graduates currently working in the energy sector, and also for new graduates trying to look for work just now. I'll start with you, Ryan.
Sure, yeah. I think my advice would be to build skills that can kind of travel across these offshore energy systems. But what does that mean? But I think fundamentally, engineering is engineering. I studied at University of Glasgow. I studied aeronautical engineering. I went on, stayed down there, got into research and did a PhD. So I got heavily into aero engineering, if you like, in that sort of world. But fundamentally, the sort of principles around fluid mechanics from an aeronautical sense are similar to hydrodynamics from a marine environment sense. So some of my early work when I moved to Aberdeen was actually in and around offshore wind, where I did most of my project work. So skills can be naturally transferable. It's not necessarily down to you as well, but we still need good people in the oil and gas sector. I'm not going to stop talking about that because it's real important in the short term, whether we like it or not. but the same core strengths around engineering, operations, integrity, project execution, safety are also matter in other sectors, in wind, in hydrogen, and such like. I think the other thing to look at is to follow kind of real work, not just the media sound bites or what have you. Some of the opportunity in wind is absolutely genuine, but the UK sort of jobs outcome depends on how much of the engineering, as I was talking about earlier. I'm passionate about local content and protecting our supply chains, but so much of that work is actually offshored, it's outsourced, it's done overseas. It's not really of benefit to the UK supply chains. And on top of that, again, as I said earlier, the TUNOS, the transmission charges, as an example, makes a policy matter that makes some projects not really feasible. Certainly north of the border adds a sort of an unfair sort of penalty to those sorts of things. But I think the best way the energy transition is there's different runners and riders all going at different paces. But the best way to stay employable is to become useful and across the whole system, take interest and recognize that you can transfer those these engineering skills that you've learned, and actually in a lot of cases really quite easily. We've seen that with our business. We were set out, 90% of our work was oil and gas. We were doing some work in and around offshore wind as well at the start. Now we're around about 50-50 between oil and gas work and work in energy transition and new energy vectors. So companies can transition, and so can individuals, and you've got the core skills there to transition your careers.
Thanks. Okay, yeah, good. Thomas?
I'll answer the other part of the question then about sort of new graduates who are looking to get into the industry. And I think, as I touched on earlier, it's a different landscape to when I graduated. And I think one of the key things, as I mentioned earlier, is that potentially those big pathways don't exist. There is still a few that exist out there to get onto the bigger programs, but there's a lot of companies out there working in the energy sector now, small companies that are starting out in new areas, and they don't have the necessary luxury of big marketing budgets and people going around all the universities. And I'll be honest, big websites like GradCracker and the likes that still exist out there, they're expensive. These are not free things to advertise on, and therefore you find the bigger companies are on there. There's a lot of great small companies out there, and it's only as you get bigger that it's easier to market the opportunities out there. And even if someone's not advertising, it doesn't mean that there isn't an opportunity to go and work for them. Again, show my age, but I remember doing mail merge and going through the yellow pages, just looking for engineering placements, and just throw my letter out to lots of people, hounding people to try and get people. And there is a bit of tenacity needed to really show your interest. And I think that's the second point to it, that coming out of, everybody comes out with a degree from university, whether you've got a first, a 2-1, 2-2, it's almost a bit irrelevant, because it's the screening criteria. Some people might screen out whether you need to have a first or a 2-1, and some people that's the screen at first and want 2-1. So it varies, but it's a screening mechanism. If you ever get past that, it's more about beyond your education. You've been in education and you've been taught to be in education for, if you count secondary and further education, it's 11 years you've been talking about your technical capabilities. But if I'm brutally honest with you, you're really just starting when you get into the workplace. So you're not coming out as a technical expert just because you've done theory for the best part of 11 years. Your job really starts when you walk into that workforce. So what people, and particularly speaking from experiences employing graduates and various roles, is it's the people that are just ambitious to learn, who have taken a vested interest in the industry that you're working in and the challenges that it faces, showing those sort of interpersonal skills. We're really big on our culture. We really want people to fit in and be part of Apollo. It's more than a job. It's being part of something bigger and making change. So showing those skills and how you've gone into industry events, or how you've partaked in more like team events, and particularly from around sports and things like that, just show a great all-rounded sort of individual, as opposed to coming in and talking about necessarily, you know, whilst it's great and it's great for everybody to achieve these things, you've got to recognise that you're definitely in a more challenging environment now. There's a lot more graduates out there, and everybody has that degree certificate, and everybody did a thesis, and you know, it's something related to their degree. So you've got to differentiate yourself, and I think that's where you should really showing your passion and how you want to be involved in the business, and put some research into the business that you're applying to, so that you can really talk about their values. It is important for employers to hear that you want to be part of a culture and a part of a business, not just wanting a job in the sector.
Yeah, Craig, do you have anything to add to that?
I was just going to say, you started kind of treading on my toes a bit there, but then you went down another path. So I'll kind of pick up what you said. Like I've got 2 points here, but they're both kind of small. But essentially, this is kind of for graduates and people of sort of young professionals, graduates. I would say the application process to a job is not actually as formal as you think it is. I would say don't be afraid to make use of a network, you know, in quotation marks, but really just make use of having a personal connection with somebody and just approach people directly. As we were doing a bit of research for this LinkedIn Live, Thomas, you just touched on it there. There's a lot more graduates, and so I was kind of digging down deeper on that, and I was like, well, is there more graduates? Is there less jobs? And I think the consensus actually is because there's so many job aggregation sites, so like Glassdoor and like GradCracker, it's actually just really easy to punt your CV anywhere and everywhere, as like, you know, almost immediately, and that is leading to this sense of there's more graduates, there's less jobs, but actually there's just more CVs just going in circles, just in basically white noise. So I think if you want to separate yourself from that, and again, you don't need to be the type A personality proving you're the hungriest dog out there, you know, scraping at the door of Apollo trying to get a job. But maybe if you see Ryan or Thomas at an event that you're just attending because you're interested, and you say, "Oh yeah, I've heard about Apollo. Oh yeah, I saw your LinkedIn Live. Can you tell me a bit about this, that?" Chat to them for 5 minutes, and then say, "Hey, would it be okay if I just emailed my CV over to you?" Just like that. That already probably puts you a few steps ahead of finding Apollo through GradCracker and using the automated system to put your CV into the email box. Because then Thomas or Ryan will then take your CV and think, yeah, I remember that guy. I'm going to give that to the HR guy, or I'm going to put it here, or whatever. So like I'm saying, it's not a big amass a huge network and be the hungriest person needing a job. It's not about that. But if you can try and make use of approaching people directly, it goes a lot further. And again, it doesn't actually need to be directors. Obviously, they're the top dogs you want to be tapping up. But I've had students from RGU, when we were doing a bit of voluntary work there, hand me their CVs and just said, "Can you pass this on to a manager? And is there any placements going?" And I'll happily pass it on. And that manager will look over the CV and think, "Yeah, okay, we'll speak to him," or, "Oh, not right now, but we might have something in a couple of months' time." Even just that little personal touch can take you further than just spamming your CV on GradCracker and just, you know, firing it out to 100 people. And then the second bit of advice, which is just absolutely about employability, my advice to anybody would be get good at digital apps, especially graduates. So I'm talking, you know, your Microsoft Office suite, so Excel, Word, all that stuff. But to touch on another one of Thomas's points, well, no, it's my point that Thomas stole actually. It's that when you're a graduate and you come out of uni, everything is kind of theory based. You're not a technical expert at all. However, you could arrive at a company as an expert in Excel. And chances are, if it's an oil and gas company in Aberdeen, maybe 40 to 30% of that company probably don't even really know how to use it properly. So you're already going to add value to the company immediately by saying, "Oh, are you struggling with that Excel template or whatever? If you give it to me, I'll help you work it, and then in exchange, you teach me the technical bit, you know." Or you come out of uni, we did MathCAD at RGU, and I came to Apollo and they used MathCAD, and I already had a head start on another graduate who came and had to learn it from scratch. But I was already basically ready to go with it, fluent in MathCAD, and could just get right into making calculations straight away, whereas the other graduate had a bit of a lag to learn it. So that would be my two. It would be don't be afraid to approach people more informally with your CV. The worst they can say is no, and get good at digital skills, because the digital transformation started a while ago, but it's not stopping. It's going to get more and more digitized, everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Very interesting. So on your first point there, Craig, you spoke about like sort of using your network as a student. Sometimes students, all they know is their lecturers and their peers. How do they go about finding this network? Is it just a case of cold messaging people on LinkedIn, or how do they go about doing that?
I'm not on LinkedIn anymore, but it's okay. But the problem is LinkedIn is then getting a bit more impersonal again, because you're then onto websites, job aggregation sites. You're then just getting to a place where lots of people can access. If you are interested in your local jobs, so jobs that are local, offshore Europe obviously used to be a massive thing in Aberdeen. Still happens, but it's not as big anymore. But go to these events. And I'm not saying you need to attend every single one with your notebook and write down everything that's said. But if you're looking for a job in the energy industry, I'd go to one of these things and I'd walk around stalls. And then if you see something that's interesting, you see a piece of technology for some company, and you think, oh, that's kind of funky looking. Can you tell me about that? And then they start explaining it. And then you could say, oh, and do you guys take graduates at all? Like, I'd like to work on this. I'd like to be involved in this. And then that's it there. That's a network that's networking that you've just done. And then you just have to say, hey, would it be okay if I emailed my CV over to you on Monday? Then, yeah, the worst they can say is no. Chances are probably everyone will say yes, because you never know what's going to be on the CV. It might just be the thing you're looking for as an employer. But yeah, I would say try not to just sit and rely on GradCracker and Glassdoor and all these things and just punting your CV out again and again and again and again. As much as it seems like that improves your chances, I don't think it really does. I suppose you could. It would be sounds wild to somebody of my age, but you could go and knock on somebody's door and say hello, or are you hiring? And again, it's a bit more of a personal touch. Or you can email, the company email and say, info@Apollo or whatever, and say, hi, I'm a graduate. I've got these skills. I've been reading your website. I've been reading your case studies. I like the sound of them. Would you consider my CV? And even then, that's just a little bit more personal than the GradCracker and the Glassdoor and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll move on to some of the questions. We got some questions in the chat here now. Let's kick off with the decline in the oil and gas industry, is it counterproductive to apply for a job in that sector?
No. I think I probably touched on this point earlier, actually. It's sorry, I'm just jumping in, Snare. But
Go ahead.
I touched on this point earlier that everybody talks about transferable skills and what does that mean? But I think we've all sort of touched on this, is the fundamentals of oil and of engineering apply to the whole of engineering in the energy sector. So getting involved in something which, oil and gas, one of the things I love about it is the complexity and the challenging nature. And it's actually, even in itself, has evolved massively in the last 10 years to being focused a lot more on a leaner operation and more sustainable, heading towards net zero and looking at reduction in emissions and trying to extend things that have been in the sea and on the seabed for a huge amount of time. It's really technically challenging, some of the projects that you can get involved in. And as you're trying to emerge into new areas, we're still talking about, in large, quite, still molecules. We're talking even more now about electrons. And these are all still fundamental engineering skills, problems to be solved. And whilst we know that the renewable jobs are going to increase, what we all know that pace is just not keeping up, and we've also got a declining oil and gas sector, but it's still got a lot of work to be done, and there's still lots you can learn from it, particularly as a young professional coming into that. So absolutely, I don't think it's counterproductive at all. I think you can learn a huge amount, and like I think Craig touched on earlier about being open to learning new things, and working. It's obviously good if you're working in companies. I plugged a bit of Apollo of where we are. 50% oil and gas, 50% renewables, and doing a lot of work in these new areas, and people are able to move between these. But don't pigeonhole yourself. Try not pigeonhole yourself in whatever career, and show curiosity. Keep asking questions about something else and how that might relate to new things. And I think it's you can certainly learn a lot from the oil and gas sector, and I would highly encourage people to keep coming into the sector. We need good new talent to come into the sector, to keep innovating it, and help us sort of evolve into this transition.
Yeah, and as you see, Thomas, that these people that they might come in and be working in an oil and gas project one day, but quite literally they could be working on a hydrogen project or something else that the next day. Some skills are exceptionally readily transferable, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not be too. I thinking back to maybe 5-6 years ago, and graduate sort of interviews that I've been involved in. Then there was a period of time where the candidates were quite particular about they didn't want to work in this, they only wanted to work in that, and I've definitely noticed a bit of and that wasn't the case before necessarily, and I don't think it's so strongly the case now either. People are passionate about the energy transition, but I think they're realistic and understand the things a bit better now, but there's still more work to be done in that respect.
Yeah, just to add on
absolutely.
to it, I was just going to say, obviously, I started in structural engineering, which is oil and gas focused, and now I do more sustainability and net zero stuff. As much as it probably annoys my manager, I like to think I could go anywhere in Apollo if I wanted. Like, if he doesn't, he wouldn't like that, obviously, because I'm working for him right now. But I like to think if I decided I wanted to just do data development or something like that, I would just go, right, see you later. I'm now doing this for Apollo, and Apollo would accommodate that. So yeah, don't pigeonhole yourself, like Thomas said, because you never really are. All your skills are transferable.
Yeah, so on that note, so Craig, you obviously made that transition. Why did you choose to move away from the technical structural engineering side? And also, do you see any specific transferable skills in your case between oil and gas structural engineering and advisory?
Yeah, so kind of like anything else, it was just a try something new thing. There was a lot of, the advisory team had a little bit more work than they could handle. The structural team had a little bit less. So I just went over and I said, hey, I can help you do this job. I took over skills to that team. So I took over sort of data analytics skills and calculation skills that I think the manager quite liked over there. So he said, could I do this next job for him? And I really enjoyed working in sustainability and working in net zero. And yeah, I think the big transferable skill, if we're talking engineers, which everyone in this call is, it's problem solving. It's really fundamental problem solving. It's your critical thinking skills. Yeah, you have to learn a bit more terminology. You have to learn about, what does this acronym mean? What does that mean? What we're trying to do here. Once you get your head around all that, which is pretty quick, yeah, I think your biggest transferable skill should be your critical thinking and your problem solving skills, and then data calculation, all that stuff. Nice add-on. And then you get softer skills as well. So I now present to clients a lot more than I did in the structural team. So there's a lot more articulation skills and preparing presentations and being able to visualize data and your points so that people can easily digest them. Often it's a bit of an afterthought, that skill. People use PowerPoint really lazily, in my opinion. Now I think PowerPoints, everyone's just look terrible, and I think it is a real skill to be able to present your work, make it interesting, make it articulate, succinct, make it nice and quick, and that's a skill I learned in advisory. And that's what I quite like. I quite like presenting to people. I like explaining things. Like the sound of my own voice. Maybe that's just what I've just said there.
Very good. So on that topic of kind of career paths, Thomas and Ryan, both of your careers started in a more technical role, but then you've sort of moved into more strategic managerial roles where you're overseeing operations or aligning the business generally across departments. So can you talk us through why you made that shift, if it was a conscious decision or it more naturally happened because of your natural strengths?
I think this maybe for me it's maybe a bit of both, and where my natural strengths, where I always jokingly say I was a terrible engineer and there was far better engineers around about me, so let them get on with it and I'll help to manage things and get into the operations. But I think and it's partly true that is the case, I have to admit. But the other factor is that I struggle to certainly in the early days sort of have the confidence to go to the networking events. I did, and I pushed myself to go to that when I got my sort of first job up in Aberdeen. I went along to business breakfast and all the rest of it, but I was I was apprehensive about them, just as my character is. But I think that's a real kind of positive thing to do, is to network yourself and to sort of push yourself out there. And I found that actually I quite liked it, as much as I was and I still get a little bit apprehensive about going to events or doing a talk or whatever these days, but actually I quite liked it. And what I really liked was actually going out with the BD team in that company and speaking to clients, and suddenly realized that it was really quite interesting. You could find out people want to offload their problems. So clients tell you, yeah, this is not working, and all the rest of it. You hear a bit about their private lives and all that as well. And I just found it really fascinating and interesting. You sort of try to think, right, how do we try and solve that problem that he's just outlined there? You go back to the office and you speak to your colleagues, and I just found that was more aligned to my skills. So I guess it's an element of skills, but also an element of trying something that I didn't think I would enjoy doing, speaking to clients or doing sales or going to events, and actually liking or seeing the positives from it as well, the positive benefit to me and the benefit I could bring to the company I was working with at the time.
I guess.
What about you, Thomas?
Yeah, I guess from my perspective. So yeah, I graduate with civil engineering, did structural engineering in oil and gas, and I really enjoyed the problem solving aspect of it. I probably fell more naturally sort of into the sort of management roles through. I sort of went into like project management, did a little bit of that as well as engineering over my time, and then started managing teams from sort of engineering manager perspective, engineering director perspective, and I think it comes from that sort of curiosity. I ask a lot of questions. I stick my nose in maybe where it's not always wanted, but just because I'm like, well, why are we not doing this better? And how can we help people do more and better? And, you know, that aspect of it is I really enjoyed. And once you start, you know, getting involved in it and understanding that what business means, and that you start appreciating actually it's quite different doing the engineering to being on the business side of it and trying to manage the stresses that are in the background. It's also a skill of, you know, not necessarily sort of wearing them on your sleeve. And it was a different challenge for me, and one that I really got an excitement out of. And I think it's still problems. It still kind of leans back to my sort of foundations of, and when we talk about transferable skills, you know, problem solving is one that I do most days. Talking to people, communicating an idea and communicating a solution is key. What engineers do all the time. You know, some write it down, some talk it, and some make it a terrible PowerPoint presentation. But it's I think that was just me. I kind of more fell into it and loved it, and continued on that path. And was given the opportunity, you know, which was always good.
Yeah, really good. Okay, one last question to end it. If you could go back to when you were a graduate and give yourself advice on one thing to start doing, what would it be?
Be more curious. I
think I started talking about it in the last one really there, but it's about I'd go back and tell myself to do more of what I thought I was pushing myself to do. I was still not doing it maybe as much as I could have done in terms of going out to see clients and going to these events. But I think it was so beneficial, albeit at that stage I'd already had a job. I do think that really was fundamental in helping me to progressed my career in the way I wanted it to go. But for new entrants or people looking to make a new entry into the energy sector, and I thoroughly recommend it. It's fast, it's exciting. Yes, there's lots of change just now, but with that change comes opportunity now and in the future. But I think it's just to get out there and create the opportunities. You can create opportunities for yourself. I think that was touched on by others, and Craig had mentioned it. So just get out there and speak to people, go via your institution, go along to the events, or whatever it may be. If you actually look around, you'll find that there's events on reasonably regularly, not far from you, regardless of where you are in the UK.
Yeah, I think obviously I was just a graduate 4 or 5 years ago, but yeah, something I would say stop doing. I've already said it, but stop relying on Gradcracker and Glassdoor, and sort of just Googling graduate job in Aberdeen. Works great if you're really at a loss, but try and first, maybe your mother or father has a friend, or you've got a family member who has a friend in a company. Just try that avenue first. The worst thing that happens is they say, no, we're not taking CVs at this time. But I think that's a better route to go down than kind of the job aggregation sites, because now that AI is becoming more prevalent, people are you can just spam your CV just anywhere and everywhere. You just get lost in a sea of it. And then something to start doing. Ryan's just kind of touched on it, but yeah, if you find something you think you're good at, so you're finished uni, for example, I was quite good at MathCAD compared to my contemporaries in uni, and I started really honing in on that, not quite in my spare time, but I would start to use MathCAD to assist in projects outside of just having to learn it for a uni course. And then that helped me kick on when I first joined Apollo, because I already had that foundation of that. So if you find something you're good at, it could be a technical skill, it could be presentation skills, it could be you're really good at writing, or you're really good at speaking, just hone in on it. The more refined skills you take to your first employer, or any employer as a graduate, the quicker you're going to pick up the rest of it. If they have to teach you how to do a lot of things first, you're going to take baby steps the whole way. Whereas if you come to an employer and say, well, actually, I can already present stuff, or I can already use this software, you skip a few steps, all of a sudden they're not teaching you as much, and then you can become more autonomous and kind of work under your own steam a lot quicker.
I sort of threw it in at the beginning, but yeah, I'll keep it brief. But that what I touched on earlier, where you've been in education for 11 years, and you can almost come out of uni thinking, I know a lot, and the expectation is I'm coming in, and you go through that interview process, trying to convey that you know a lot. And then I think the mistake people make is trying to carry that on. Actually, stop pretending that you know things, almost just pretend that you're dumb and that you don't know anything, and that you're here to learn, because you are there to learn. So, stop pretending that, and just actually start being more curious, start asking more questions. And I'm not meaning, can you show me how to do this again? And can you keep showing me to do this? It's a bit, I understand the task you've given me, and I've gone away and thought about it, but can you just explain this a little bit more to me? And, I know that this is the bit that I'm doing, but how does this fit into the bigger project? And, what else is going on? And just asking questions, and don't pretend you know anything. It's in your first 3 to 4 or 5 years, it's really important that you learn and absorb information. After that, people start to expect you to have that knowledge. Therefore, take advantage of it in your early years to play dumb and ask questions. You'll learn more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good place to leave it at. So we'll wrap it up there. Thanks very much to the panelists, Craig, Thomas, and Ryan. I think that was a really engaging discussion, and I've definitely taken a lot away from it to think about. I believe the recording for this available on YouTube if you want to share it with any of your colleagues that have missed out today. But on that note, I think we'll end it there. Thanks everyone for coming along, and yeah, hope you enjoyed.
Great, thank you, Sneh.
Thanks.